What's up guys, I'm Ace, and yesterday, November 9th, we got a pretty big update for hardcore players out there, and this was a pretty massive SMG buff for hardcore game modes. The patch notes, for those of you guys that haven't seen, which if you haven't seen it, I will leave a link to the patch notes down below, but in these patch notes they say SMGs now have a one-hit kill potential at close range in hardcore. Now this is significant and actually raised quite a few questions because prior to this update, all of the SMGs with the exception of the Spitfire had a 28 maximum damage range, which means that in hardcore game mode where players have 30 health, at least traditionally, all of the SMGs were a two-shot kill even at point-blank ranges unless you were hitting a headshot. So with these patch notes they were fairly vague, and the first assumption is that they buffed that maximum damage range on the SMGs to bring it above 30, which would now give them that one-shot kill potential. This actually got me pretty excited because I thought this would also be a hidden core buff for SMGs, because if you take them from a 28 damage to a 30 damage, now they would have a 5-shot kill potential in core game modes instead of the 6-shot kill potential that we've seen since launch. So the first thing I did is I immediately started testing these maximum damage ranges, and it turns out they were actually unchanged for the SMGs. So all of the SMGs had the exact same damage profiles as before this update, but when you actually boot up a hardcore game, you'll notice that the SMGs do in fact have that one-shot kill potential as the patch notes suggests. So what actually happened with this patch is they reduced the health in hardcore just slightly. Traditionally throughout the entire history of Call of Duty, players in hardcore game modes have had 30 health. With this update, it appears they reduced that from 30 down to 28. What this means now is all of the SMGs, with the exception of the Spitfire, now have a one-shot kill range. Keep in mind, with the Spitfire, it has a maximum damage of 27, so it is still going to be a two-shot kill all the time in hardcore, which I don't think is really that big of a deal since it has such a high fire rate. But for all of the other SMGs, you now can get one-shot kills without hitting a headshot. Now this health change also had some effects on some other areas, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but first let's have a look at the one-shot kill potential of all of the SMGs in hardcore after this update. As you can see here, the MX-9 has a pretty decent one-shot kill range at about 19 meters or so. The GKS has a very solid one-shot kill potential at 37.5 meters. The Spitfire, like I said, doesn't have a one-shot kill potential. You're still going to be getting two-shot kills with that. Although if you do hit a headshot up close with the Spitfire, it will be a one-shot kill. The Cordite has a relatively small one-shot kill range at 12.5 meters. And finally, the SOG 9mm has a pretty short one-shot kill range at roughly 8 to 10 meters. So this, in my opinion, was a very good change for hardcore game modes, and I'm pretty excited for the hardcore players out there. I think it brings a lot more variety into this mode, because before this, it was all just assault rifles, tactical rifles, and LMGs. Now we're actually going to see SMGs in the mix, especially the GKS. The GKS, in my opinion, is now one of the best guns that you can possibly use in hardcore game modes, because you get that handling and mobility of an SMG, but you get that one-shot kill potential that was traditionally reserved for a lot of the assault rifles in this game. Just keep in mind, at the really long ranges, you still will need to hit 2 shots, but it is such an accurate SMG that generally that's not going to be too much of a problem for you. So those are the intended effects of this patch. They were meant to make it so the SMGs are now going to be viable in hardcore, but since they changed the health rather than changing the damage profile of those guns, this had some effect on other guns as well. For the ICR, the KN-57, as well as the Vapor, all of these guns have a minimum damage of 29, which meant before this update, they would drop off to a 2-shot kill at a certain point. Now with this update where players have 28 health in hardcore, all of these guns are going to be a one-shot kill all the time unless you're shooting through something. So they actually got a pretty big buff as well, but the Maddox didn't get this buff because the Maddox has a minimum damage of 27, which means it's still below that threshold and it still drops off to that 2-shot kill at the exact same point. A couple other key guns that this had an effect on are the Strife Pistol, which was already extremely powerful in hardcore. Once again, this has a minimum damage of 29, which means the Strife is also a one-shot kill all the time in hardcore game modes now. And this is pretty big because the handling and mobility of a pistol is extreme, and now you can just one-shot people across the map with that pistol. And this also makes the Strife probably one of the best guns in hardcore game modes currently. The only downside is your magazine capacity, but if you're managing that well, you shouldn't have any issues with that. And finally, the last gun that this had an effect on that wasn't mentioned in the patch notes is the Mozu Pistol. Once again, the Mozu Pistol does have a minimum damage range of 29, which means it is now always going to be a one-shot kill, whereas before this update, it would drop off to a 2-shot kill. So that's it for the general health change in hardcore, and since it was a health change rather than a damage change, none of this has any effect whatsoever on core game mode. So the SMGs didn't get that hidden buff for core game modes, unfortunately, I would say, at least in some cases. I still feel some of the SMGs could use a little bit of a buff in core modes, at least for the console version of the game. I realize the PC version's a little bit different, but of course, that's just my opinion though, and you're welcome to share yours down below. In addition to the slight health reduction in hardcore modes, they also slightly reduced armor protection. So now in hardcore, all weapons will always be at most a 2-shot kill even against armored users. Before this update, with many of the SMGs, it would take you 3 shots to kill in hardcore in order to kill an armored user at some ranges. That's no longer going to be the case. At most, armor is just going to absorb 1 shot in hardcore modes. And the last update to hardcore was in hardcore TDM as well as hardcore kill confirmed. You now have the ability to use 2 of each specialist per team. So this just opens that up a little bit more, which I think is good because many of the specialists don't really have a place in hardcore. So now if somebody else picks one of the really viable specialists in hardcore, you also have the opportunity to use them as well. So that's it for the main multiplayer changes. Now I want to talk a little bit about some Blackout changes that were made. These are relatively minor changes, but I just wanted to point them out. First up, they gave the Paladin a buff, so now you can get a 1-shot headshot on somebody that has both level 3 armor as well as 200 health with a trauma kit. This makes the Paladin even more powerful now, and you will still be rewarded for aiming for the head, even on a player with level 3 armor. Now, I kind of have mixed feelings on this. I kind of feel like if you have a level 3 armor, which is relatively rare in this game, and you also put a trauma kit on, I kind of feel like nobody should be able to get a 1-shot kill on you. But at the same time, it's kind of nice knowing that if you have that super powerful Paladin, and you're accurate, and you actively aim for the head, no matter what now, you will be getting a 1-shot kill. But of course, that's something I'd like to know what you guys are thinking about in the comments down below, because I think it really could go either way for a lot of people. But finally, this brings us to another change in Blackout. Last week, they removed 9-bangs completely. I didn't make a video on it because I didn't feel there was enough content in that update to really make an entire video on, because they simply removed the 9-bang from Blackout. But now that the 9-bang is gone, they made some adjustments to the concussion grenades. So with concussions, now when you get stunned, you have the ability to change stances, which is a really good change in my mind. Before this, if you were standing and you got stunned, you couldn't crouch, you couldn't go prone, you could basically just stand there and wait to be killed. Now at least you have some ability to go prone, get behind cover or something. You're still going to be very stunned and very vulnerable, but you have some control over your character, and you have some way of trying to counteract that a little bit. So in that way, concussion grenades were nerfed a little bit, but at the same time, they gave concussion grenades a slight buff by adding a flash effect. And this was due to the fact that they removed the 9-bang from the game completely, so they wanted to have some of that effect applied to the concussion grenades. So now you will not only be disoriented from the concussion grenade, you also will be flashed slightly, although it's not nearly as bad as the 9-bangs were before. So with that, that's pretty much it for yesterday's update. Of course, there was some zombie stability updates in there as well, but I'm not a zombies channel, so I'm not going to cover that. But hopefully you guys should see less crashes in zombies. And also, they did mention that this coming Tuesday, Nuketown will be added into the game. I'm really hoping it's put in its own 24/7 playlist, at least to begin with, and not in regular rotation. But of course, I'd like to know what you guys are thinking about all of this in the comment section down below. Now, it turns out this video ended up being almost 10 minutes, and what you guys have probably seen from a lot of YouTubers is them stretching it beyond that 10-minute mark. And this is for a really good reason. The algorithm really likes it. You guys have probably heard people like Drifter talk about this. I know he mentions it a lot in his videos. And I've done some tests with it on my channel, and it's absolutely true. Anytime I upload a video more than 10 minutes, it gets significantly more interaction. It makes a big difference for us. And this is my job, so it really does make sense for me to push it to 10 minutes when it makes sense. But I will promise you guys, if it's a video that naturally was only about like 5 or 6 minutes or something like that, of course, I'm not going to try and stretch it to 10 minutes. What I do is I just make the video the way I always would make the video. If it happens to be right around 8.5 to 9 minutes or more, but not quite 10 minutes, I might put a little clip or something at the end like I'm going to do in this video, but I'm not going to become one of those guys that stretches 2-minute content out to 10 minutes by any means. If it's a short video, it will stay a short video, but if it's pretty close to 10, I will sometimes be pushing it over 10. So what I'm going to be doing in this video is I wanted to share my very first kill chain that I got on stream in the most recent stream, which, by the way, if you guys haven't checked out my Twitch channel, I try to stream several times a week there, and you just might catch a moment like this. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, right there, Gung Ho just got me that kill. 100% gung-ho.
UAV standing by.
Apparently I'm not so bad at hardcore.
Hellstorm available for tasking. Attack chopper available for tasking.
I think I just got my first kill chain. Ugh.